everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the 2016 Retina MacBook Pro and see how this particular MacBook holds up in 2025. Now, the big thing to keep in mind here is that these types of tablets have kind of started to show their age. In fact, they've started to show their age probably a lot sooner than you would have probably thought. So they're a little bit older now, and they may not necessarily be the first tablets that, we would recommend buying anymore. But here's the thing, if you do plan on going through and kind of picking up a MacBook, there might be some better options out there for you than these ones. But these were very, very impactful devices. These were very impactful, MacBooks for the most part. And that is kind of one of those things to keep in mind here as well, because if you are about to go through and pick up a Mac, you would look at these particular MacBooks and think to yourself, well, they look just like the other MacBooks, like the newest ones. So these 2016 ones that are almost 10 years old should be able to, hit the nail on the coffin or hit the nail on the head, whatever the saying is, for us picking it up, right? And you're going to see why that might not be the case. But if you do want to pick up some MacBooks that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the 2016 Retina MacBook Pro. On the outside of these MacBooks, you're getting a very good build quality. These were the successors of the 2015 Retina MacBook Pros. And the 2015 ones were basically one of those types of, MacBooks that Apple kind of made that basically really changed how a lot of people looked at MacBooks. The 2015 ones people really liked. The 2016 ones and onwards, people really, really didn't like it. Now, the reason why people didn't really like it that much was because they removed all those ports and all those other things that we liked inside of our particular MacBook. So that was another big thing that we ended up seeing there too. A lot of people were not happy about the way Apple approached that. And going forward, again, Apple didn't really learn their lesson until like a few years after this. So that was just one of the issues. Now, when you look at the MacBook itself, it still actually looks very good. You're getting the space gray model, like this dark gray model, which looked really nice. You're able to get a really good build quality inside of it with the Apple logo on the top. And some of these models, depending on which one you got, either had 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports or they had 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports. Remember, these things still came out at a 13-inch model or a 14-inch model. So from that side, this type of MacBook still actually held up very, very well. And looking at it that way, I think this thing held up very well from that side. So I will definitely tell you, in my personal opinion, kind of going through and picking up these types of devices, they held up very, very well from a build quality standpoint. And from the port selection, this is where the things kind of started becoming a little bit iffy. There was a time period for years where I did not buy one of these types of MacBooks, and it was because of this. The port selection, only having 2 USB Type-C ports or 4, felt like a downgrade coming from our previous port, right? We had like 2 Thunderbolt 2 ports, 2 USB Type-A ports, an HDMI port, a MagSafe port, and an SD card slot. Like, we had a lot there inside of those MacBooks, and I was so happy to have that type of capability there. Unfortunately, when we did kind of go through and go down to the 2016 MacBooks, Apple went through and removed all those ports. And I think them doing it like that at one time kind of made a lot of people not super happy about it. But over time, people kind of, got a little bit more attuned to it. So nowadays, we're kind of more okay with it, right? I would say a majority of people are probably okay with how these MacBooks kind of hold up, especially having laptops that have like USB-C only. It totally makes sense now. And Apple's reverted this, and they've now given us HDMI port, MagSafe, and an SD card back inside of our Pros. So that right there does kind of change some stuff. But I will still say, as of this point, this was a very big abrupt change. Nowadays, people are probably okay with it, but at that time, it was a very big change for the most part. Now, one big thing to kind of keep in mind here, if you're going to go through and pick up these Macs, you have to open this thing up and see another big problem that people had: the butterfly keyboard. This was without a doubt one of the biggest problems that people were experiencing inside of these types of MacBooks. And this in and of itself was probably the main reason why a lot of people would basically go through and be very, very upset about this type of MacBook. The butterfly keyboard inside of it was just a keyboard that was plagued with issues. So people were basically able to go through and, they were able to go through and like pick up this, keyboard and use it for a while, but it was already a pretty big, stark change. The change was Apple had to go through and basically kind of remove all the travel inside of the keyboard. So that right there was a very big difference. And that was also like kind of a big downside here. Like you were, going to go through and pick up a MacBook and the keyboard was already such a big difference. There was way less travel. It just seemed like there was like very little clickiness kind of going on. And it was very loud as well. It just didn't seem like a good keyboard. It was very flat. The trackpad itself was nice because it was so large, but the actual keyboard itself just wasn't really that nice. It also had the touch bar in some of the models, and a lot of people were not happy with the touch bar whatsoever. People were so unhappy with it that they did kind of go through and end up removing it. So that right there was another really big issue a lot of people were experiencing there. But you did have the display. The experience with the display though was really nice. Pretty thin bezels all throughout. It was a very good looking device, right? That was one of the biggest advantages for this type of, MacBook for the most part, because it looked so good and it felt so good. So if you were in the market and you were going to go through and pick up a device, this was a really, really big advantage. And I do think this in and of itself was such a nice thing kind of going on here. Again, it wasn't necessarily a perfect type of device, but I felt like for the most part, if Apple was going to go through and pick up a Mac, or if you were going to go pick up a Mac, this was a pretty solid option from that perspective. But again, it wasn't perfect. Another issue was kind of the performance. The performance of these Macs when they first came out were good, but then they quickly kind of felt like a little bit of a older styling of a device again. And the reason for this was because of the chipset inside. When you have this Intel type of chipset, basically it's just not going to be that great compared to the M series of chipset that Apple has made since 2020. So you're getting a slower type of Mac. You're also going to, basically get a Mac that's not going to be performing that well. And there's going to be a lot more fan noise going on inside of it as well. So it really is not going to be that great of a MacBook from that particular side. And I feel like that right there is another one of those big things to kind of keep in mind there too. Because if you're going to go through and pick up a MacBook, the performance of this Mac and the capability behind it, it's not really going to be that great, right? So this is where I would really recommend you to kind of look at everything about this Mac. There's a lot of pros. It's a very, very cheap MacBook. It is basically very portable. It's built really well, so it still feels like a very premium device. But the cons are basically, one, it's done getting software support. So it's not really getting any more software updates. That right there is a very big issue. It has this butterfly keyboard, which is just not good. A lot of people do not like it. If you get the 2 USB Type-C model, I probably wouldn't recommend doing that either. It's a very loud MacBook with its fan noise. It's just very, very clunky in that perspective. And it just really is not going to be that great of a performing MacBook either. Like, it's definitely going to start showing its age, and it's going to feel like it's a very, very old type of MacBook. And that right there is going to be one of those things to kind of keep in mind there. Now, with all that being said, the bare minimum I would recommend buying is an M1 MacBook Air or an M1 MacBook Pro. Those came out about 5 years ago, and those have gone down in value quite a bit too. So you can easily go through and buy one of those types of MacBooks, and it's not really going to cost you an arm and a leg. And if you go with that direction, you can definitely save a lot more money than having to go through and buy one of these 2016 models. So that's kind of what I'd recommend thinking about. Hopefully that makes sense to some of you. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.